All right, hello everyone. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here with you today. My name is Dr. Ty, and this webinar I'm really excited for. If you're watching this as a parent, you probably have a child at home who's stressed out, who's anxious, who's nervous, and you're looking for resources. And it's something that really resonates with me. I'll share some of my story in a bit, but I remember one time when I was in 7th grade, standing on the recess area outside alone with no friends, and I've been through a lot myself, so I want to share some of my own examples as well as personal experience and give you guys some resources, because I know if you're watching this as a parent, your heart goes out for your child and really you want to do what you can. So I'm ready today to engage with you guys. I've got my notes, I have been practicing, preparing, and ready to go. So if you are watching this, one of the things that we know is that it's tough to be a child right now, and that's what all the numbers, all the stats, all the studies are showing, that stress is getting bigger. But I know with my 11 years of experience of being a chiropractor that you're not watching this for numbers and stats and studies. You're watching this because of your child. And it can be really tough when you see all these scenarios but not know what to do. And your heart goes out for your child. You see them struggling, just want to know what to do to help. And so you're on this webinar with a chiropractor. You might be wondering, like, what does a chiropractor have to do with anxiety? I'll share that in a moment here. But the point is, the parents that we see in our office, they have done a lot. You're likely not showing up to us with the first time, like just starting to look into resources for your child. A lot of the parents that we see, like probably what you've gone through is maybe you've spent hours on Google. You've talked to friends, you've talked to your neighbors, you've been to lots of doctor's visits, you've been on Facebook support groups, you've been to meetups, whatever it takes, because you want to help your child. And you've put all this information together, and pretty soon you start to become confused and almost angry because the information you get doesn't really provide the solution that you've been hoping for. What we see so often is you get an idea, but it's in this traditional model, this mainstream model, and it's not working. Or maybe the solution that you have is to treat the symptoms. Maybe it's a medication that you say, you know what, it's good short term, but I don't see my child being on this med the rest of her life. We had a young man in yesterday who had taken a med for anxiety, and he said as soon as he took that medication, he saw his creativity plummet. He loves music, and he would, over a few-month period, he said he'd write 4 or 5 songs, but as soon as he started an anxiety medication, all of a sudden he didn't even want to put his pen to paper anymore. And he said, you know what, it's nice to be less stressed, the med's good for that, but what's really frustrating is I also want to live life. I still want to have feelings and emotions and experiences. I don't want everything dampened. And that's sometimes the struggle that we see, is that the solution after all your homework isn't very enticing. And so after you do all this work and you've got a little confusion, a little anger building, we see this ability to this moment of getting frustrated and just kind of fed up. And a lot of parents, we see them become exhausted, because I know that you likely, if you've done all this, you've been up your own nights reading, you've been up late worrying, you've been up late talking to your spouse, and you hit this point of just pure exhaustion and almost like helplessness or hopelessness, that maybe you're just alone in this journey and that there's nothing you can do. And you hit a point where you say, okay, well, I've tried it all, so maybe I'm going to watch this webinar from a chiropractor, see if I can get even a glimmer of hope to help my child. And my hope for you is that maybe you haven't gone that far down things, that maybe you are early in your journey in looking for resources for your child. And maybe your neighbor said, you know what, the whole family chiropractic team really helped my child become more calm, more connected, more grounded. They've got great resources. You should go check them out. And if you're here early in your journey, welcome. If you are one of the moms or one of the dads that I described, that you've been through so much, welcome as well. I want you to know that for most people, we are the last stop, so it's not a situation we're unfamiliar with. We see this scenario happen quite a bit. And the reason is that most people just don't know that there's these solutions out there. You know that there is a solution, and that's why your parental instinct is so strong. You keep searching, and that's what we tell parents all the time, is that, you know what, your instinct as a mom or as a dad is way stronger than pretty much any doctor out there. Even the best experts in the world, if your instinct is telling you something, you gotta go with it. And that's what I'm here for you today, is really to give you that resource, because I've seen it in so many parents, and I want to be able to help you guys out. So what we're going to talk about today is the couple different ways to classify anxiety, and not just the traditional diagnoses that you might have heard. I want to talk about why it's happening and some of the long-term effects it might have. And then, of course, the thing that I get most excited for is the solutions, what to do to help. So I want you to know that if you are watching this and you're still kind of wondering this chiropractic piece, because you've heard chiropractic is good for adults with back pain and you crack and pop, and you haven't heard that there's this neurological chiropractic that's safe and gentle, no cracking, popping, and it's good for kids, you might be a little bit confused. So I'm going to touch on that as well at the end of this webinar, so you have an idea, because I find it's really a missing link for so many of the families. And it's a missing link not because it's not well respected or well received. We actually are really well received. We have pediatrician, internal medicine doc, ER doc, naturopaths, PTs, OTs, speech therapists. All these child professionals have brought their children to us because of the results that we get. So we do a good job. It's just that we're not well known, and that's why I love being out here with you guys today. So as we get started, I want to talk about the two styles of anxiety. And maybe just the last side note too, the thing that we do in our office with the kids piece, in our office in a given week we might have 100 visits at our kids. So between that professional experience and my years of training and what I've done, as well as my personal story that I'm going to share with you today, I feel not only qualified but really excited to be here, because I know what you're going through, I know what your child's going through, and I know you're looking for a solution. So get started then, if that sounds good. As I mentioned, the two styles of anxiety. This is something that I actually ran across by a colleague of mine. So it's not something you're not going to go to the medical book and look it up and say, what are the two classifications? This is something that she started using. I thought, you know what, this is really good. I like it. It's simple and it's easy to get the point across. So rather than worrying about a specific diagnosis, is it generalized anxiety? Is it a social anxiety? Is it OCD? Or is it just stress? Really, they can all fall under these two buckets, these two categories. So I want you to picture for yourself, as you're going through the day, you wake up in the morning, you got to get the kids ready, you got to get their lunches packed. So you're moving around and you're driving to work, and maybe someone cuts you off, and you get to work and your boss yells at you and there was a deadline you missed, or you get a call, you know what, Johnny's home, or he's got to come home, he's sick, he's thrown up, he's not feeling well. And you have all these stresses going through the day, and they're coming into your body. Now I want you to picture for a moment, when these stresses come at you, they've got to go somewhere, right? They don't just disappear, unfortunately. So you have two options. One is they're going to come back out of your body, they're going to be expressed. Or number two, they're going to stay in your body. So I want you to think of these two scenarios as really what's happening in your child. So the first type or category of anxiety we like to talk about is this outward expression. This is the child with a lot of energy, a lot of outward emotion, maybe a jitteriness, almost like they're kind of chatting all the time. They're always talking. They want to have control of a situation. And in this scenario, we see a child who often is starting to be labeled as a bad kid. So maybe they're more likely to have detentions or suspensions from school. Maybe the teacher thinks, they're not behaving well, they're not focusing, so they don't get good grades. This is a kid that, if they're a little bit younger, maybe it's more tantrums or outbursts or this behavior issue, because this stress is coming in their body and they don't know what to do with it, so it has to come out somehow. This is something that we see sometimes even could be misdiagnosed. A child, for example, with ADHD, they might be hyper just because they have so much stress and anxiety, their body has to do something with it. So with this outward piece, I just want to make sure I'm covering everything here. The other piece that we'll see is a lot of impulsiveness, because again, this energy comes in and it's just go. So maybe they're not good socially. They are tougher to make friends because this impulsiveness makes them say things they regret later. Or this impulsiveness makes them not very good at sharing or playing with others. So we can see this affect the social dynamic as well. with both the outward expression of anxiety and the inward piece, sleep can definitely be an issue. So if a child, right before bed, they're racing around, it's still likely they have a lot of stress in their body. They're trying to get out, so it's going to be tough to fall asleep from that. The inward side of things, then, what we see there is, this is really what I relate to the most. So what's happening here is the stress is coming in and it's not going anywhere. So we start to see a child who becomes more bottled up. In my case, I was definitely labeled as shy. And I realized, maybe I wasn't shy, maybe I was just nervous. We had one mom who brought her 8-year-old daughter to us, and she said at home, she is loud, she's funny, she's playing, she's laughing, she's having a good time. But when she goes to school, all of a sudden this anxiety builds in. And this is because the stress is coming into her and it's not being able to release itself. So I'm just double checking one thing here as we keep going, making sure we'll keep this connection. So anyway, when we have this outward anxiety, it is something that's you see, but the inward anxiety you don't always see. So like I said, maybe they're labeled as shy, or they just kind of like to stick to themselves. A big thing we'll see in this situation is someone who is afraid to try new things. And I remember that a lot as a kid. It's like, nope, if it's a party with someone I don't know, if it's going out, if it's meeting people, whatever it might be, like that's not for me. So being afraid to try new things is a big piece. And then also perfectionism. This was something I noticed as a kid a lot, is I did well in school, I got good grades, but I also wanted things to be just right all the time. And because of this perfectionism, there's so much stress of doing it the right way that I would find myself putting things off or not even starting, procrastinating a lot. And the thing we'll go into in a little bit here is this style too can often be more pleasing, because this stress is there and they don't want to push any buttons. They don't want to make things worse. So for myself, I would just smile. Like, oh, you bumped into me in the hallway? I would smile and like hope it doesn't cause a riff, right? Versus the outward anxiety person, if they get bumped into in the hallway in school, they might start a fight because they put that energy outward. And so as we go into this inward one, I want to go more into my story because I think it's really going to help you relate as a parent. So when I grew up, I, for quite a while, lived out in the country. I was in Wisconsin, outside of this town in the middle of Wisconsin called Wausau. We lived in the country, and for a while we lived on a 40-acre plot of land because my dad was building a log house there. And it was fun. I loved being in the woods. I loved playing outside, building forts, all those things. And because we lived in the country, the school we were at was elementary, and it was pretty small. We had one class, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third, one class for each grade. And they were a small class, might be 15 kids. A bigger class, if it was really packed, might be 25 or 30 kids. But it was one class per grade. And so as I was going through elementary school, I would say I was middle of the road. I'd raise my hand once in a while. I did a good job making friends, talking to the teacher, being involved. And I wasn't the super expressive kid, but I wasn't the super shy kid either. Until 6th grade came. Now in 6th grade, instead of being outside the city, we had to move. Our school was in the middle of the city. And Wausau is a decent-sized town, so the grade school that I was in was small. The middle school that I had to move to in 6th grade blew my mind at how big it was. I went from 30 kids in my class to 330 in 6th grade class alone, and 1,000 kids in this school. And as I'm looking back, I remember myself, as I said, I was kind of decently open to the world, and I went to 6th grade and all of a sudden shut down, withdrew, because it was so much for me to handle. And my brain and my nervous system said, whoa, let's keep you safe here, Ty. We're going to withdraw a little bit. We're just kind of observe. We're going to do the wallflower approach, be on the outside. Don't get too involved. I remember in 5th grade, I loved flag football, and I would have loved to go out for football the next year in 6th grade, but because of all that worry and all that concern, I said, no, let's just hold off for now. So going through 6th grade, I had a few friends that moved with me from the country into the big school, so I had an ability to get started, get going, and I could see myself going through 6th grade, starting to open back up. And I'm getting to the end of 6th grade and like, okay, starting to settle in here, making some new friends, feeling more comfortable. Next year I feel I can go out for sports or do whatever I want to do. However, another thing happened. So in 6th grade, my parents got divorced. And my mom remarried, moved an hour north. And so my sister and I moved with my mom an hour north. So suddenly, instead of being able to open up a little more in 7th grade, now I get to 7th grade and I start this whole scenario over 100%, except now I have 0 kids, 0 friends, 0 people that I know. And so I go right back down to shut down. And I remember, so in 7th grade, some of the clothes, so this was the mid-90s, I remember like my wardrobe is I had these flannel shirts with a hoodie. So the flannel plaid and had the button up, and then the hoodie piece was a gray hoodie with the drawstring, and I had a red one, a blue one, and a green one. My mom rode Harleys at the time, and her husband, my stepdad at the time, would go out to Sturgis, so I had some Sturgis shirts and Harley shirts. And then there was actually, I was just thinking about this very morning, is I had a couple shirts that were called No Fear. If you remember that brand, that was popular in the 90s. And this No Fear shirt, it was so ironic because I was like trying to fit in and wearing this shirt in 7th grade when really I had so much fear and worry inside. Like I had no right. Looking back, I'm like, I was a complete poser wearing that shirt. And I remember this morning, this memory came into mind where on the back of one of my No Fear shirts, it said something to the effect, when fear faces you or when fear looks in your eyes, look right back at it. Something like that, right? So I'm wearing this shirt one day, and I'm after school outside waiting for the bus, and I'm nervous, and this older guy in 8th grade all of a sudden pops his head in front of me, and he's just staring at me. And I'm already nervous, so pretty soon I'm freaking out. I'm like, what's going on? And all of a sudden, he turns and walks away. And I'm like, what the heck was that? And pretty soon I realized he had read the back of my shirt, and he wanted to challenge me with some fear and look me in the eyes. And so I was reflecting back, like, what the heck was I doing wearing that shirt? Not a good situation. Anyway, the story I opened with is, I remember one day I had one of those flannel, the hooded flannel, and it was early on in 7th grade when I had just moved there and I didn't know anyone, and I was outside at recess and I was standing there, and I remember looking around and not knowing anyone and not having any desire to open up and engage because I was closed in, and just feeling so worried, so anxious, so nervous because, like, what the heck am I going to do? How am I going to make friends? And I want you to know that that's the scenario that can happen with the shy side of things. Fast forward a little bit into classes now in 7th grade, and I remember math and science were my strongest. So one day in math class, teacher had asked a question. It was Mrs. Knox, our 7th grade math teacher, and Mrs. Knox asked, and a guy sitting next to me, his name was Dustin, he raised his hand, and he answered, but he got the answer wrong. So I'm like, oh, cool, I know the answer. So I remember in 7th grade, I raised my hand, I answered the question, Mrs. Knox goes, yep, Ty, you got it. And as soon as I did, I remember this feeling of, oh crap, I don't have any friends. I was just out on the playground standing there by myself. And I just answered this question, are they going to think I'm like a know-it-all? Or is he going to think I'm trying to be better than him, the Dustin kid sitting next to me? And literally, it was another moment of this stress that started to shut me down. And literally, that was the last time I raised my hand all through middle school and all through high school, because it was such these accumulation of events. We're going to talk about in a little bit how powerful they can be, but this accumulation of events just were too much for me to handle. And pretty soon I had this protective bubble around me because I didn't want to engage and I didn't want to risk this danger that I feared was out there. Whether it was real or not, probably wasn't real, but my mind made it so real that I started to disengage and become even more shy. So I want to share that story because as a parent, you might relate yourself. As you're watching your kids, you might relate to what they're going through. And most importantly, for you to know that, you know what, I've been through some of these scenarios. So when we have kids come in our office that are going through something similar, I'm pretty excited for them because I know that there's this opportunity out there to open back up. So as we go on then, I want to cover let's do this. So the two biggest concerns then. So as we look at this outward anxiety or the inward anxiety like I went through, is there's two really big long-term effects that I want you as a parent to be aware of because I think they're super important. So the first one has to do with more that outward energy, that outward anxiety, and when your gas pedal is always stuck on. So when we go through the day, our brain is designed to perceive the world around us and sense if there's danger. So the two main things our brain is trying to do is number one, keep us safe, and number two, get really good and efficient at it. So what happens is when we're experiencing this stress, our brains start to perceive what was a stress, like, okay, now when that comes next time, if I got bumped in the hallway by a kid with a red shirt, now the next time that kid with a red shirt comes by me, I'm already a little bit on edge. So we start to become more efficient at being stressed. And we talk about in our office, it's like the gas pedal being stuck on. And the engine is revving even when it shouldn't be revving. And what happens is this perception of a stress here all of a sudden makes other things in life more likely to feel stressed. So pretty soon you have this series of events, like for myself, maybe raising my hand and answering correctly. You know what? That shouldn't have been too stressful, but because of all the stress building up to that, for me it was almost a pivotal moment in my life that changed so much. And so when we're thinking of these stresses, I want you to know for a lot of kids that we see, it's not just one event. We're going to go through some examples in a moment, but what happens is when your body is experiencing stress in some areas, it makes other areas more likely to be seen as stressful. So now, waking up, having to get dressed becomes stressful. Having to get out the door and get on the bus, having to do homework, having to eat dinner, having to go to bed at night. These things that should be routine, because the brain is under so much stress to begin with, suddenly everything else becomes stressful as well. And what I see happening here is this closed-in effect that I said, is because if you're open to the world, you can go through the day and interact like you want to, and you can have fun and you can play and engage in the world. But if you see a stress and you close in, and now you're a little more on edge, so the next thing that stresses you closes you in a little bit more, and pretty soon, closed in, closed in, closed in. What we see is this, rather than expanding into the world, you're contracting from the world, or your child is. And what I see in my personal life is I worked really hard to open back up. It took a lot of work. I remember when I graduated chiropractic school, I was doing this associateship in the Twin Cities here with a doc. He'd been in practice a long time, and he would do these new practice member workshops. And I had to do one once, and there was going to be one person there. And I had to do this workshop, but I was nervous as heck. And this was, 10, 11, this was way after even college or chiropractic, so I still had this nervousness in me. So I've worked really hard to go from being super nervous in one person. Today I was pretty nervous doing an event like this. I've done a lot of speaking and workshops in the community now. I still get nervous, but I've been able to open myself back up. And the reason I feel this is so important is I've seen the opposite with my mom. So my mom has had a lot of stress over the years, and she has had this fear and anxiety just shut. And now she has sort of this armor and this shell built around her because there's been so much fear and anxiety, it's just shut her down. And so if you weren't in her inner circle before she really has built this shell, it's tough to get close to her right now. And even if you are in the inner circle, she's still like kind of looking out because she's always thinking someone's out to get her, or something's out to get her. She's, I love my mom to death, and she's really good at always telling me the things to look out for when I'm traveling or driving safe or whatever it might be. She's giving me plenty of warnings of what there might be for danger and how to be safe about it. But I see that for this first piece of this stress pattern gets going, and because it keeps going, you start to shut down. So that's a long-term effect that we like to be aware of right now. And the second piece is a concern that we see with parents in our office. It happens more on that inward, that shy style of anxiety, is we see kids that are very pleasing. As I said for myself, I would never want to cause a fight or a disturbance. So I had this built-in mechanism. If I was nervous, I would just smile really big. I'm like, well, if I'm smiling, they can't get mad at me. They can't think I'm thinking weird or like anxious or whatever it might be, because if I'm smiling, it comes across as nice and gentle. But with this pleasing personality, a big fear that we see with a lot of parents in our office is that they become worried that their kids won't know good boundaries because they've been under so much stress. And as a parent, you want to see your child developing this intuition and this gut instinct, right? So if a stranger is walking up to your child, you want them to be able to listen to their gut, just like you have your parental instincts. We want to see our child saying, oh, that situation doesn't look right. Or that's, making me a little nervous. I don't quite know what it is, but I'm going to get away from it. However, if we're under so much stress all the time, and something comes in that's also stressful, guess what? We naturally say, well, I'm under stress all the time, so what's one new stress? And that gut instinct, we start to lose. And so I had a mom tell me once when she brought her daughter in, she said the biggest concern that she has is that as my daughter gets a little bit older, if she's offered drugs or if she's offered something that's not safe or not good for her, she's just going to impulsively say yes. Now, fortunately for myself, because I have this pleasing personality, I feel, looking back, like super fortunate now that I was getting involved in a good crowd. So I would always go with the flow, and it would be easy for me to say, like, yeah, let's do whatever. But fortunately, the options were maybe playing video games or playing football outside, like pretty safe things. I didn't have these tough situations that a lot of teenagers that we see face nowadays, and whether it is a party or maybe it is a date or in the backseat of a car, whatever it might be. Like if you have that pleasing personality and that anxiety that you've never been able to really judge for yourself what's good or not good for you, it's tough to make those good decisions in the moment. So that's the second piece of a long-term concern that I see parents coming in with, and sometimes they're not sure if they're justified with it or not, but it's like, again, that parental instinct, that gut instinct is saying, like, you know what, I think there's something going on, I just can't put my finger on it. So I know we've talked a lot about, between my own story and these examples, like a lot of the concerns, and we are going to get to some of the solutions, which of course we're most excited for, but I just want to, for you to understand like this, that this is a real situation that's out there. So, we'll just cover a couple more things. If you have a child at home and you're sensing there's some of that nervousness building, but you're not sure, you don't know is it a worry, a concern or not, just some other things to look out for. So, as I mentioned, we'll see kids that are really perfectionistic. That was myself, so I put things off. A big thing is if all of a sudden you notice your child not wanting to try anything new, that could be sort of one of those warning signs, like, hey, you know what, they used to be a little more exploratory. They'd want to go outside and play, try a new game, meet new friends, whatever it is. And if you see them starting to shut down, that could be a warning sign. If your child really needs control, it's because the stress and the anxiety can be really afraid of something new. So if you have control, then it's much easier to not worry about it, because if you have control, then you can predict a better future. And I'm laughing here because there's a little boy that mom brought in, and I was asking mom, so what are your goals? And she said, well, I want him to be calmer. I want him to be able to make friends, that social piece that we talked about before, interact better on the playground. And so I'm like, okay, yep, that sounds good. And I asked the little boy, all right, bud, what are your goals? And he goes, well, when I tell my friends to do something, I just want them to listen to me right away. So he was a perfect example of wanting that control because he was so worried if he didn't have that control. With the internal piece, there's where we sometimes start to see more of internal body symptoms. For example, someone who is always kind of got a queasy stomach or butterflies in their stomach. We had that 8-year-old girl that I mentioned who was really engaged at home but really nervous at school. There'd be mornings where she would throw up and she would get so worried about school she'd start throwing up all morning long, and mom would have to keep her home from school. And it's because that anxiety was building internally and it wasn't being expressed, it wasn't going anywhere, so it was staying stuck in her body. Fortunately, with the adjustments that we provided, very safe, very gentle, she did great. And mom said, you know what, she's not having that anxiety in the mornings anymore. She's not throwing up. She's not nervous about school. And internally, her body felt so much better. Sleep can be a big one, as I mentioned before, because when the brain gets revved up, either one, there's a lot of energy, so your child's kind of fidgeting, moving around before bed, or two, maybe they're falling asleep, but it's restless, and they have that anxiety sometimes has to come out at night, maybe as night terrors or bad dreams or talking in your sleep, because that stress wasn't processed during the day, so it comes out at night. Another good story, we had a little boy whose mom, as we were adjusting him, the first two things she noticed was he was sleeping better and he was pooping better. Anyway, as we're adjusting, mom comes to me, she's like, oh, here's what my son told me the other day. She said, Mom, my brain used to feel like it was always wiggling. Now, my brain feels better. And so there had been so much stress built up in his body for so long that his brain was always wiggling, but he couldn't even identify it. It was the first time he ever told his mom about that, and he couldn't identify it because it was what he was used to. It was, like I talked about before, if everything's stressful, you don't even know what non-stress feels like. So, and then the last two things to keep an eye on, if a child's sick a lot, that can be because the stress response is pulling resources, so your child gets sick easier, or when they do get sick, they stay sick for a really long time. And then the last piece is they have a lower reserve, meaning they get set off a lot easier, especially with the behaviors, the tantrums, the meltdowns, things like that. It feels like, hey, wait a minute, I just asked you to put on your socks, and maybe your child has a sensory processing issue and they don't like their socks, but these little things can set a child off. It's because they're already so stressed, they're already on edge. It doesn't take much to tip them over the edge. And with that, then, if your child does get stressed out, the other thing we'll see is they stay stressed for a really long time instead of getting stressed and like taking some deep breaths and letting it go down. There's a mom, her teenage boy we've been working with for a while. He just started high school this year. He's doing actually quite well. But she said he used to get stressed and she could physically see him going and like build up in his body, and it would just stay there, stay stuck. And since he's been being adjusted, we've been able to see, she said it's still, he'll get stressed, it builds up, but then he goes, and he shakes it off, kind of, in a sense, does that, and he moves on, because we've let his body release that stress easier. So, how does this happen then? I think that's such an important piece for parents. They know, they've seen these different scenarios, and maybe they have a diagnosis, maybe you don't. Regardless, you're always wondering, like, why does it happen, right? Because sometimes as a parent, you get the answer, like, well, my kid used to be happy, now they're sad, and the doctor tells you, oh, it's genetic. And you wonder, well, wait a minute, why, if my son's doing great and my daughter's the one that's struggling, how could it be genetic? Or you're told, well, oh, it's because it's more common in girls than guys, right? And you get these answers that are like not very satisfying as a parent. And you want to actually know, well, what's the reason behind it? Because you don't really care about the stats or the figures. You care about your child. And so what we've been talking about so far is a lot of times with stress and anxiety, it's not about a one-time event. It's about these little stresses building up over the years. And so it can start very early on. Maybe it is a stressful pregnancy. That's why when families come into our office, we're looking back all the way to the pregnancy. We know where they're at today. Mom can describe that situation, child can tell them what they're worried about, but let's back up. Let's look at, well, what if the pregnancy was really stressful, or there was a lot of testing or events or worries or concerns, whatever it might be. Maybe a lot of families we see, they're moving while they're pregnant, changing jobs, things like that. So that means the baby's starting to get some of those stress hormones going already. And then maybe delivery was difficult. There was a long labor stalled, or they needed to do a C-section or suction the baby out, whatever it might be. It's amazing the technology we have to get the baby into the world, but it can be a big stress on a baby. And so as a little child or an infant, you don't see anxiety by them saying, hey mom, I'm nervous, I'm worried about homework and making friends. They're not going to tell you that. So what does anxiety look like in a little baby? Well, maybe it's colic, maybe it's reflux, maybe it's this stiffness or this rigidity, this tension that we see in a baby's body sometimes in our office. It's these little things that start to add up. And so then as a child's going through life, now they're learning to walk and crawl, and the toddlerhood is now where more of the physical stress comes into play. A lot of times we think of anxiety only coming from emotional stress. But here's the thing. We had a mom, she said, you know what? The first year of life, my daughter was always happy. When right about a year old, she took this really bad tumble. She got some stitches. She banged her neck, her head up pretty good. And pretty shortly after that, she started being grumpy. And we saw her about 3 years old. She's been grumpy literally these last 2 years. And we did our evaluation and found, yeah, sure enough, her neck was thrown way off from this tumble, and it was stressing her brain out. And once we started adjusting her, she said, oh, now my daughter's back to as happy as she was in that first year of life. So physical stress can be a huge thing. So there's emotional, there's physical, and then there's chemical as well. And this can come into play as we get a little bit older now. We're hitting that middle school age where we got puberty and hormones starting to course through our body. And whether you have a story like mine or not, middle school is a stressful time, right? Because your expectations are a little bit higher with homework and tests. You got all those hormones and those chemicals going through your body. Maybe you're trying out for sports. Maybe you're exploring dating or kissing or all those things that we do as teenagers in that middle school age, that high school age, and you're preparing for adulthood. So these stresses just start to compound. And what we'll see sometimes is they keep going, and all of a sudden you hit that middle school, high school age. And if your body's been building for this long, it can only sustain that for so long, and it crashes. And that's where that depression side can hit. I've seen that with my mom as well, where it can go up and down because the body can't sustain such high stress for very long. So that's, again, where the mental health of these older kids really comes into play. So those are... Again, what we're looking at then is this anxiety. It's not coming oftentimes from one event in life. It's this accumulation of events. And what happens neurologically then is, I want to go into this last part as we're wrapping up this webinar, is what can we do about it? And to understand what we can do about it, it's so important to understand all these back pieces, because what happens is every time a stress comes at us, we start to get wired for it. And the more we get wired for it, the easier it is to be more stressed. And so we have to start to backtrack and get the brain out of this stress state. And just as a side note, thank you guys for making comments. And Tamara, hello. It's been a while since I've seen you, so hello to you. Of course, my lovely wife is making comments here too, so thanks again, Samantha. Shout out to you for being so supportive in this process. So as we're going through these options, please know you can ask questions. You can reach out before or after, especially if you're watching this recorded, as I know a lot of people will be. Definitely feel free to reach out, give us a direct message, shoot a comment in there. We'll keep track of them, and we can always answer them on this as well. So as we're going into solutions, I want to cover two options then. So number one is things that you can do in the moment to help kind of calm the moment back down. And I think of these as almost like emergency options to get through it, right? So what we're looking at is getting the brain out of that fight or flight, and instead of the foot being on the gas, we're going to put the foot on the brake pedal. And if we can apply the brake, it starts to slow the brain down. When the brain slows down, the body slows down. So number one is to activate part of the brain to help you get out of stress is not to deal with a stressful situation and try to talk through it when you're in a closed space. So for example, your kid has a tough day at school and you're driving home, car is a pretty closed space. You're in your house, it's a closed space. And when our eyes can't see very far, it prevents our brain from getting out of this stressful situation and creating a creative, helpful solution to it. So number one is bring your child into an open space. Our office is by the Mississippi River, so I'll go by the bridge and I'll look out into the distance, and I can look a really long ways. So bring your child to a field, a park. Whenever I travel, if I'm in the mountains and I'm looking way into the distance, it's amazing how my brain, my mind just opens up. And it's so much easier to problem solve when your mind is open to a solution, and that neurologically can happen by looking into the distance. Number two, in this heat of the moment situation, is to think of movement as a way to help your brain. So a lot of us think of, when we're stressed, we've got to exercise. And exercise and big movements like that are really good for that first type of anxiety that we talked about, that outward energy, because you have all this adrenaline, all this cortisol, all these stress hormones rushing through your body, and you've got to get them out, right? And so like for me, I was feeling, a little worried about this today, so I went for a run and it helped flush some of that out of my body. However, where that falls short is on the emotional side of things. So you see, if it's more that withdrawal response, a lot of times kids are processing all these internal emotions and internal stresses. So while the big movements are good, the fine movements are really good for that internal stress and that internal processing. So here what we recommend, that's why journaling is so good when you're feeling stuck or feeling stressed. That's why arts are good. That's why there's such thing as art therapy. Because fine motor, being creative and using your hands in all those subtle ways helps activate the emotional side of your brain to process those stresses even better. Playing a musical instrument is really good because, again, it calls for fine movements. So number one, looking into the distance. Number two, if you just got to get the stress hormones out, get your kid outside playing on the playground, going out for sports, whatever it might be. Or if it's more that emotional piece, get them moving their hands or fingers, that fine motor piece. And then the last piece here, something you've probably heard of, is deep breathing. Because when you breathe through your belly, it neurologically calms the brain. But I want to give you two strategies to make it even more effective. So number one, when you're doing deep breathing, and this is really good on the way to school, if that's a concern for your child, or to help your child sort of reset, calm down at the end of the day on the way home from school, is doing deep breathing by putting your tongue on the roof of your mouth right behind your front teeth. So when you put your tongue there and deep breathe, it helps the calm response in your brain. And then the second piece with deep breathing is when you're breathing, I want you to have your child and yourself, this is good to do together, but breathe out longer than you breathe in. So if I breathe in, 1, 2, 3, I breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I breathe in shorter, breathe out longer, that also helps calm the brain. So those are two strategies you can do to help deep breathing be even more effective. Now, the thing is, with some of these strategies, when I talk to parents, what we see is that they help in the moment, but parents are still wondering, why are these moments needing to be here so often? Why do I need so many moments that I need to help my child? And that's where what we do in our office really comes into play. And the neurological chiropractic that we do is the last thing that I want to share with you today because it's so powerful in helping these kids. And what happens is these moments start to build up, and pretty soon our body is running this stress response, whether we know it or not. And that's where we get this on-edge feeling, right? Like I talked about, your bucket's already full, so it doesn't take much to tip it over the edge because all this stress that has been built up is being stored in the body. So the neurological chiropractic, the one thing that we love to see kids with is with our very gentle adjusting, where we don't do twisting, turning, popping, cracking, but gentle neurological adjusting, it actually helps find those stress areas in the body and let the body release it. So the brain, instead of being trained for stress, 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 can start to find moments of peace, moments of calm, moments of relaxation and start to wire a little bit differently. And instead of being stressed and wired for stressed all the time, now the brain starts to be wired a little bit differently for those moments of calm, peace, and harmony. And so what we do, we have some really great technology, I love it, state of the art, and we can measure all the different nerve channels in the body. If they're already doing well and showing calm and peace, we'll see white. If they're showing stress, there's mild, there's moderate, there's severe, there's off the charts severe. But what happens is we can measure without putting anything in your child, no injections, no radiation, no needles, nothing like that. Very gentle from the surface. We do these scans on pregnant women, newborn kids, and what they do is they help us measure with all the events your child's been through in life, are they storing stress in their body? And if they are, what we do is that adjustment process to help release that stress. And what happens is we're applying the brake pedal with our adjustments and the brain's starting to get calmer. Now we see kids that are doing so much better. So this was a teenage boy, his first scan here. We did a follow-up, and we still have a lot of work to do on this next scan, but we can see way more white here than when we started. So that's the cool thing with our technology, is not only do we have a starting point, but we can actually measure progress throughout care. So this boy, as an example, he was kind of that jittery piece that I talked about before, where he'd come in and just like so much energy, so much excitement. He would usually get up at 4 in the morning. And once we started adjusting, Mom said for the first time ever, he stayed asleep until his alarm went off because his body started to calm down. We have a girl who's I resonate with a lot because she's kind of that, you can see that passiveness, we'll say, that shyness that's just started. She's just gone into 5th grade, about 10, 11 years old, getting close to 11 here. And Mom said she's surprised at how well the school year is going since she's been being adjusted, because that calm is starting to get into her body. So as we're wrapping things up here, I want you to know that we are here for you guys. If you're a parent and you've been through so much, like I mentioned in the beginning, know that that's a lot of the parents that we see. So you're not alone. There's resources for you. There's options to help. And it's something that we get so passionate about, not only because I get to see these kids start to open up and start to light up and start to expand into the world, but just because of what I've been through personally, I know the level of the impact that that has in the future and how much of a difference it's making for these kids' lives. And of course for you as a parent to have some relief, some like, oh, there is a solution out there, there is an answer, and know that, you know what, it's not going to be this way forever. So if you have any questions, please reach out. As I said, put it in the comments. We'll be able to answer there. If you want to direct message us on Facebook, that I know can be a super easy avenue since you're watching this on Facebook right now. If you have other families that need help, please share this with them. And of course, if you want to give us a call, shoot us an email, whatever's easiest for you. Know we're here for you. We'd love to see you guys. We'd love to help. And you'll do great. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks so much for joining me today, and much love to everyone.